Hey everybody, Jeff Tidwell here with another one of my tweet videos for you today. It is Saturday, June 6th, 2020, and we are diving back into the past, going back into August and September of 2019 to look at some tweets. Of course, as always, I can be found on Twitter at RealJeffTidwell. I'm also on Gab, Minds, Telegram, Parler, and Instagram. If you're not watching this video on YouTube, you're watching it on BitChute. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy the content, please do hit like and subscribe. Please do leave me a comment below with your thoughts, observations, accolades, criticisms, intellectual dialogue, non-intellectual dialogue, and whatever else you'd like, trolling, whatever it might be. Leave that below, and of course there's the little bell below for notifications as well. And if you find my cadence to be a little bit on the slow side, you can hit the 2x speed button and get all of the information in half of the time. Time is the currency, of course, and that is double bang for your buck. So without further ado, let's get into some tweets for this fine and very hot Saturday afternoon. And so we're going to start today with a Twitter story. So earlier this week I did solicit Twitter, my following on Twitter, and the general Twitter public for a Twitter story. So someone did slide into my DMs with something interesting to say, a topic or an anecdote. My friend Alu slid into my DMs and he said the following. Hello. How are you doing today? I responded, I am doing great. How are you, my good friend? And I sent him a GIF or GIF of Tony the Tiger from Frosted Flakes saying great. Alu says, yeah, that's great to hear. And I'm very sad and sorrow with tears with my family. I respond, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? And then I also say, I'm so sorry, my friend. I want to help. What is your Bitcoin information so I can transfer money? I want to help. Elu responds, oh, I'm not having Bitcoin here, but we do have Western Union or World Remit, where you can help us through that. I can give you my mom address where you can help us. I ask, how much money would help you? I can send it now. I send Litecoin or Ethereum. Elu responds, yeah, you can help us anything kindly from your heart because nothing is small in the eyes of poor. Please, just anything kindly from your heart, even if it is little. I say, what's your Litecoin address? My funk soul brother from another mother? Alu says, oh, what do you mean Litecoin address? I'm having Western Union or World Remit address? Question mark. I respond, blockchain, my friend, blockchain. Are you ready for the next generation? He says, oh, my friend, I don't actually know what you are saying. My good friend, I say, I just sent you 10 Litecoins. I hope they find you and your family safe and secure. I'm a good Samaritan. Praise Jesus. Alu responds, yeah, you sent it without any address. I say, your family contacted me while we were talking. Your son said, send Litecoin. Bitcoin is gay. Seemed prudent. Elu responds, yeah, I don't think that's true. I say, it's as true as the sun rises. My good friend, enjoy the spoils. Elu responds, okay. And I gave that a heart emoji. He says, thanks you. I respond, finally, you're welcome, good friend. So thank you very much to my good friend Alu for reaching out and providing us with this week's Twitter story. I hope to help you in the future, my friend, but in the meantime, our correspondence has been great. Now, on with the show. So heading all the way back to August and September 2019 for some tweets, analysis, breaking them down, talking about them, joking, maybe even splicing in some current events. That seems to be a thing we do over here. So let me start with this tweet here about humor. Humor involves exaggerations, elements that are off or wrong, and it is not to be taken seriously. What are normally seen as harmful or dangerous situations become avenues for comedy and catharsis. Holding comedy to a moral standard is a fool's errand, and not a fool I would go see. Okay, so just to begin dissecting the topic of humor, the definition of humor, of course you can go and check with subject matter experts. Go to Google or DuckDuckGo, wherever you'd like to dissect humor with a comedian, maybe take a master class with someone like Patton Oswalt or Joe Rogan. So humor involves exaggerations. There's always an exaggeration to every joke, something that is too much or too little, something that draws it out of reality and into the absurd. Of course, we all know, if you're watching this video, you know what humor is, but it's important that we cover the full context, the full story. Elements that are off or wrong are included in these exaggerations, of course. There's such, they're elevating things that don't make any sense. There's too much of this part and this component to the joke, you know? And that's why it's funny. It's not normal. It's not expected. It's the unexpected. So it's wrong, too. Things that are not supposed to be there, they will be seen as funny because they're out of place. There's something off, and it's got this light overtone of humor and satire, and it's not to be taken too seriously. It's not intended to necessarily evoke a specific response other than laughter or smiles and good feels, dopamine, serotonin, and maybe a little oxytocin. But of course, all humor, especially that which is less politically correct, can also produce something called cortisol, the stress hormone, in people. It can give people a little bit of pushback when they should be really laughing. The desired effect. Sometimes we say things that do not produce the desired effect in our friends, family, and other human beings on this quite irrational plane we call human consciousness. So, what are normally seen as harmful or dangerous situations become avenues for comedy and catharsis. So how many movies have you watched, especially since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where they might be a buddy comedy, buddy cops, or there's just people doing death-defying stunts, even Jackass, when Jackass was on TV, on MTV, about 2 decades ago. And I know there's newer episodes, but I haven't watched it since back in the early 2000s. People actually did dangerous stunts because it's funny and it's exciting and it's interesting. But there's also all kinds of humor that involves dangerous situations. Somebody messing around with a gun, somebody driving a car the wrong way, handling machinery the wrong way. You have things like when Wile E. Coyote runs off a cliff after the Roadrunner in Looney Tunes. There's so many places where humor includes something that you would never want anybody to do in real life. But it's funny, it's absurd, it's ridiculous, and sometimes it's even non sequitur. It's random. it's off. It's beautiful. Taking it too seriously is when things start to break down a little bit, because people do apply their filters, their codes, their political correctnesses, their modern religions to this. They look for moralism, and not just modern religions, but traditional religions too. Humor, of course, with traditional religions like Christianity and Islam, and Hinduism, and Buddhism, and all these different things out there. Okay, the Native American religions just across the entire globe. If you apply those moral filters to it, it starts to, well, undermine the humor element of it. Because it's not intended to be correct. It's intended to be incorrect, off, or wrong. So these harmful or dangerous situations, slapstick humor is danger in humor. People attacking each other, punching each other, causing violence on each other, but it's got this comedic impact. And of course, I do think that people have backed off a little bit on that over the years, due to being a bad influence on children or those who don't understand the difference between humor and reality. So holding comedy to a moral standard is a fool's errand, and not a fool I would go see. So I personally love the idea of clean comedians like Bill Cosby, right? And then also the not so clean comedians, such as Louis C.K. and others. But in essence, holding comedy to a moral standard does produce this effect of the... You're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The material isn't meant to be morally correct or exactly fitting reality. It's intended to provoke a response of laughter, something that's inappropriate, something that might be disgusting, or otherwise, it may be something that isn't what your parents taught you or you learned in church or in school. It might be politically incorrect. It might be that maybe, like my new video, equally offensive, the unfairness of being politically correct. Maybe we all, deserve to be offended at one point or another, in terms of, we don't deserve to be offended, but it's more like, just because someone's making a joke about us doesn't mean they intend to hurt us. Maybe we're all laughing together. Maybe everybody is equal under this idea of humor as a binding force that brings us all together. Nobody is exempt from humor. Nobody is exempt from being the butt of a joke. Nobody is exempt from playing a joke. We're not trying to be moralistic here. I mean, there's obviously humor out there that it's intended to hurt, that is intended not just to make people laugh, but to make people act in a certain way. Humor can be a vehicle for propaganda. Humor can be a vehicle for persuasion, and that persuasion may be closer to manipulation. It might not be something that's good or helpful, but something that's designed to achieve a specific goal for the person using it. So you have to be watchful. But holding it to moral standards makes it so that I don't really particularly care for people that do politically correct humor. I mean, it just means that they've imposed a restriction on themselves that they might be able to work well in, but for my tastes, I prefer when things are extreme and they're otherworldly and they're different. When you're really constricted and then people are saying, well, if you joke about this, you're a bad person. I'm like, look, it's a joke. It's not intended to harm. It's intended to inspire laughter and to entertain. And I prefer comedians that are unfiltered, that just say that they say the things that are our base human impulses versus trying to be above it all. And then, of course, these politically correct comedians might dip into a little bit of the social justice and other things that they might go against the humanitarian or humanistic bent of their work, just to make fun of the approved things we can make fun of. You can't make fun of this group or this person, but you can make fun of this one for arbitrary reasons. So there's definitely that. And your mileage may vary. I mean, you might enjoy clean comedians or politically correct comedians, but I personally would not go see them. Okay. Onward and upward. So the next tweet is a named tweet. It is called Food Thoughts. Food Thoughts. And it's lightly inspired by the Celestine Prophecy, a kind of a self-help novel. It's like a story of a guy and his female friend who go on an adventure, but it's kind of got these sort of self-help things built into it. And one of them in the book has to do with food. So let me go ahead and talk about food thoughts. Before you begin consuming a product of lower quality flavor profile, for example, diet soda, imagine that you ordered the higher quality version. Like thoughts, food requires time to gather energy. Savor the moment. Chew longer to absorb more nutrients. And taste the process. So let's walk through this. Before you begin consuming a product of lower quality flavor profile, like a diet soda versus a normal sugar soda, imagine that you ordered the higher quality version. So what this is trying to inspire is that when we are, it's not necessarily mind over matter, okay? It's not mind over matter, but sometimes we have these things called taste tests. And that's where you might have, 3 unmarked sodas, and the person there, they ask you, hey, will you try these? They're unmarked. Tell us which one you like the best. So you haven't been primed by knowing that, well, this one's $10 a can, and this one's $1 a can, and this one's 50 cents. There's none of that. You don't know which one is which. You're going by the actual substance of what's happening, and not just this idea of the brand, or you're not primed with the quality ahead of time. You make that distinction for yourself. And we've found in this world that so many people, they do find the lower quality versions of things, the things that are cheaper, not necessarily lower in quality, but just cheaper. They find them more appealing than the higher price varieties. And of course, there's a lot of cases of vice versa with that. But if you don't know that you're consuming something that was cheaper and you enjoy it more than something that was expensive, well, that helps us enjoy life a little bit easier, especially if we don't have that much money to spend. So it's kind of a bit of a mind over matter thing where you kind of want to imagine yourself eating something good when you're not eating something good. Because that way, you don't have to have this high barrier to entry to enjoy something. You're able to appreciate the more simple things in life, the basic things. You're not ever a victim, a prisoner of these more expensive things that I need to have that. You can actually enjoy the basic things in life, the things we can get at the corner store. But again, it's about mind over matter, and it might not work for everybody. But it's a food thought. And like thoughts, food requires time to gather energy. Savor the moment. Chew longer to absorb more nutrients, and taste the process. Taste the process. So in the book, The Celestine Prophecy, there is this passage in a couple of parts of the book, in fact. I read it about 10 years ago now. But basically they say, chew your food. Chew your food. Because the longer you chew it, the more our saliva and the process goes through, breaks things down, and then we can actually absorb more nutrients by chewing, and getting as much out of all of our food as possible. It's not just economically better, but it's actually nutritionally better in many cases, in most cases, to chew our food. Now, I'm not a nutritionist. Of course, I am not a nutritionist. Seek subject matter experts and leave a comment below with your thoughts about nutrition and eating better. But most people would agree that, not only when you enjoy your food more, not only would you get more nutrients out of your food, but perhaps you may also lose weight because you're savoring the food longer, you're fooling your body or conditioning your body into believing that you've been eating longer than you have, eating more than you have. And this is actually a common psychological trick that nutritionists might recommend. Tricking your body into believing that it's eaten more than it has so that you're satisfied sooner and you don't need to eat as much. But again, seek those experts for more information on that. Like thoughts, food requires time to gather energy, to actually provide the sustenance, the nutrition that you've requested of it. Savor the moment. Don't rush through. My cat Cindy, well, when we give her a treat, she blows right through it. She just wants that quick fix. She almost swallows the treat before even chewing it. And I say, what's the point? It goes right to your stomach. You didn't get to savor it with your tongue and everything else. You didn't get to chew it and to absorb the juices and things. You just swallowed it whole. Of course, she's a cat. Her cognitive processes might not be as strong as ours in many ways. But they require time to gather energy, savor the moment, chew longer to absorb more nutrients, and taste the process. So in the book as well, there's a chapter, or at least there's several different concepts in the book. Check out the Celestine Prophecy, by the way. It's a good read. It's a fun story to wrap around these sort of lifestyle concepts and life lessons. But they also talk about chasing coincidences and seeing where they lead you, things that appear, pattern recognition, where it seems to lead us. But it's no coincidence that chewing longer, there's so many benefits, but we're always in a hurry. We go to the fast food restaurant, we go to Dunkin' Donuts, and we're just blowing through our food. We're not sitting there. It's always this idea of we're out at the restaurant too. We have to eat at a certain speed. The people that eat slower, take their time, are they're not pushing too hard on their body. They're not trying to. They're not letting gas build up all in one spot and so forth. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but there's all these little patterns you notice. And chewing longer, patience is a virtue, folks. Patience is a virtue. So it all goes together, and it's food for thought. Food thoughts. So onward to the next tweet. So I had talked a little bit about a politically correct humor before, and the idea of offensive humor. So here is a tweet about tallying totalitarianism. I don't use that exact term, but it's kind of in that range, so we'll talk about this. When we tallied up, words were not allowed to say, people were not allowed to associate with, stores were not allowed to shop at, websites were not allowed to read, thoughts were not allowed to have, and so forth. That's a whole lot of control. I choose freedom. So let's tally it up. Words we're not allowed to say. So again, we do live in this world where a lot of people subscribe to a code of political correctness, or they might have a modern religion, for example, censorship or social justice. And these are all intermingled. They're all secular. They are modern religions for postmodern prophets. They're devoutly secular, seeking, and perhaps even the non-secular as well. They can also fall into these postmodern ideologies and ways of meaning and being. But basically, you have these systems of moral virtue and universal truth, how to make society better, how to improve everything through these rigid codes, these systems that, while they are not literally religions, if you go into the dictionary and look up modern religion, check out my video, Modern Religions for Postmodern Prophets. But if you go in the dictionary and check it out, you'll find that there's nothing about modern religion in there. And that's why I say it's not a religion, it's a modern religion. So these are basically where we don't have a God necessarily to aspire to. We don't have some greater supreme being. But instead, we start to use these systems for real-world moralism. Real-world moralism. So I say that ideology and reality run on separate interweaving tracks. Sometimes ideology has a big purpose, and I subscribe to little bits and pieces of all kinds of ideologies. We all do. We all do. We're all biased towards some form of thinking, some type of belief system, or some way that the cogs turn in our heads. Okay? I suppose you could call them the cognitive cogs. I'm not framing that way at this time, I suppose. But words we're not allowed to say, well, it's mostly a social permission thing. It's social ostracization. What's the cost of saying a word you're not allowed to say? Social ostracization. Ostracization? I can't speak today, folks, but you know the word I'm talking about. Ostracize. You get ostracized by people for saying words. It's almost like you're being scolded by your teacher or your parents or your grandparents or something. Somebody's actually out there in society saying, you can't say that word. That word makes you a bigot, or it makes you a bad person. You are a bad person. They do that a lot. And then those bad people, they become people we're not allowed to associate with. There are lots of people out there, they say just because they said something or they did something once, you can't associate with them. You're being influenced. They're influencing you to be a bad person. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how long you've been in this world or what you've seen, what you've done. That person there makes you look bad. And I say, I'm with Scott Adams on this one. I say, you shouldn't tell me who I can talk to, associate with, do things with, what I can say, and so forth. Because, frankly, why do you assume that they're influencing me? I mean, we're all influencing each other. We're all being brainwashed every minute, every day. Every minute of every day by ourselves and others. We convince ourselves of things other people do. Media, all the time watch that we spend looking at our screens, the eyeball time, we're being influenced. We're being influenced by what's happening outside. But why assume that this bad hombre, this bad lady, is influencing me? What if I am influencing her, or him, or him? Why is it assumed that I can't improve their outlook? They can only ruin or create a negative effect on my outlook. I think that positivity breeds more change than negativity. Negativity just destroys, positivity creates, and sometimes you create things that should be destroyed. But at least you brought them into the world to see, to run the scientific process and to see if they are valid, if they are in accordance with reality and humanistic beliefs of preserving life. That's another tweet we'll be going to in a moment about life. So we have people we're not allowed to associate with. We're not allowed. I mean, we are allowed to do it. It's freedom. But, we get that ostracization, which I still can't say. Then we have stores we're not allowed to shop at. Now, again, this isn't something you're going to see very normally. I think this tweet was written in the context of them blackballing certain stores for their political beliefs or their ideological beliefs. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Where now if you go to, say, for example, I think the classic example was Chick-fil-A. They say, well, you're going to Chick-fil-A? You're going to Chick-fil-A? But they have a very Christian religious view on gay marriage. They have an opinion that they've donated to this cause that I happen to not agree with. And I go, it's fucking chicken. It's really good chicken. I mean, it's not about not being allowed to go. It's about the social permission to go. There's a word I can say. Social permission. So that's another form of control. We have websites we're not allowed to read. Again, we are allowed. I have to say that again and again to make sure that everyone understands. I'm not saying you're forced not to do anything. But that's, again, certain websites. If I happen to share a link from, say, 4chan, where anonymous and other people go to spread their message and to have fun, if I happen to go there or any other website, Infowars.com. Now we're seeing some other things happen too with websites where, I use Gab, for example. Not as often as I'd like, but I enjoy Gab. I enjoyed the Dissenter app. I enjoyed the free speech web browser. I like Gab Trends. These are all just tools for gathering information on our epistemological journey. But people would say, wait a second, that's a white supremacy site, or that's a white nationalist. It was always this race thing, only conservatives use Gab. And I'm like, yeah, because people like you, which we've invited, I'm not a conservative per se, I'm an independent, but people like me that are a little bit on the right about some things and a little bit on the left about others. I mean, I'm just saying, this is a free speech alternative to Twitter. It's an alternative to Twitter. So if Twitter doesn't work for you, you can go to Gab, right? You can check out Gab, or you can go to Minds.com, or you can go to Mastodon, or any of these other services. There's a new one called Locals. Okay, and there's a ton of different video services, but it's all about alternatives, folks. It's all about alternatives. I'm not thinking about, of course we do have a propensity to go into the echo chambers that have the messaging that we're comfortable with. We're not constantly disagreeing with people, especially if a topic has been, if you're pushing 40 years old and you've already gone through every other debate with people on a certain political topic. Yeah, I mean, you kind of don't need to constantly be challenged on the same question for 20 years straight. I think we all go through this journey of finding our ideologies and finding all this stuff. It's still good to have an intellectual dialogue, of course, but a lot of times they're right about Gab. There has formed, it's a bit more of an echo chamber, just like Twitter at large. When you look at the big, the trending things, it's all very much got a skew. But I think that doesn't mean we can't all enjoy each other's presence and have fun, have a dialogue, make fun of each other, troll, whatever we want to do, share beautiful artwork, share science, share news, whatever it is that independent content creators and providers want to do, they can do on Gab, on Twitter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be ideologically based. So, but they say, you're not really. I look at that, and that's a symbol, a label that I just have. My pattern recognition picks that up as something negative, as something that I want to avoid. And I don't know why you're there. There might be something wrong with you just for using that. Maybe if you don't use it, I'll feel more comfortable talking to you. Now, of course, that's not every person. There's a lot of people that are much more open-minded than that. But that is the environment that the media sought to create around websites like Gab. And, of course, I'm sure BitChute would also be in that ballpark as well. So then we continue on to thoughts we're not allowed to have. Again, there is this talk, everyone likes to talk about George Orwell and Animal Farm and 1984, the Ministry of Truth and Thought Police and all these different things about all these different this imagery and these moments from the 20th century works of Orwell and other dystopian authors. I do have a new video out, Science Fiction Checkers. Check that out on BitChute and YouTube. I talk a little bit about how we get an image of utopia and dystopia in our heads from the sci-fi and other content we have absorbed over time. But the thoughts we're not allowed to have, of course, we can't mind read. Mind reading is impossible, so what we do is we will post a thought. And people will say, oh my God, you are not allowed to have this thought. This is outside. I'm going to have you blocked, brigaded, reported. You're not allowed to have this thought. Is it a truthful thought? That's not the question. It's offensive. If it's offensive, it doesn't matter how much truth is in it. That's what, we're seeing out there. We're not allowed to have certain thoughts. Certain things are censored. And of course, they're not censored on an even-handed basis. Sometimes it's ethos-based. If one person says something, another person could say the same thing. And, maybe it's a factor of human error where you can't punish everybody equally. I don't believe in punishment, by the way. I don't believe in blocking or any of that stuff. Okay. Let me correct myself in real time. I believe in blocking, if you want. I believe in muting, but I think when you start to report things that are, when you brigade people on social media, when you get a group together and say, okay, there's 500 of us, all of us go to this one tweet and brigade it. Get in there and tell Jack Dorsey of Twitter, tell him we have to get rid of it right now. And make it a pile on the requests. Of course, I'm not saying that there aren't tweets and other things that that break the free, I have free speech absolutism as my default. But I've often talked about, like in my video, Peace and Truth, available on YouTube. I did talk about the limits of free speech for a functioning society. You can't have absolutely free speech. You can't have things that incite violence or cause problems like that. But of course, it's subjective as to what is truly powerful enough or direct enough to incite violence. And so people will use those excuses. They'll say it's hateful conduct. I've done shout-outs to the band on this channel, talking about my friends and other people in the media, like Katie Hopkins, that just get banned off of things because people found it offensive. They found it offensive. And then you look at it and you're like, well, again, YMMV, your mileage may vary, because you might not see it as offensive while others do. And there are things that offend you that might not offend others. So we're always in this irrational human conscious state where we don't know what's going on. We're all individuals. There's 7+ billion of us, and we have all of our own preferences, in-group preference. We have bias, and we only know the world that we've seen through these fleshy orbs in our face. They're called eyes. We only know what we've heard through our ears. this technology, this organic computer on our heads, this brain processing, this CPU, it's pretty limited technology and it's prone to error. And so, we try to subscribe to things like consensus reality. We see a lot of people have looked at this situation and they're saying, this is right, this is wrong. What do the experts say? Because the experts are always right. What did they say? Well, they say this is right. So, hey, there are these people. I think Michael Tracy might have used this term, and he didn't define it. I didn't look it up, but he kind of had an implied meaning. Michael Tracy came up with, as far as I know, he came up with it, majoritarian. So like majority-itarian. And I thought in my head, I came up with my own, because there was enough vagary there that I could imagine in my mind's eye what that meant. And I thought it meant someone that is politically involved enough, I guess, but in general, it's like the silent majority, or it's somebody that just goes along with the majority, like, oh, if everybody's doing it, I'll do it, which of course was a big experiment when we had our masks and all of our social distancing protocols due to coronavirus in the past 3 or 4 months. We actually tested this idea of like how much are you willing to go along with? Like how much authoritarianism will you put up with to achieve security, the security from the virus? So those questions actually were raised in public consciousness for a long time. But even then, there were people that were reporting tweets and saying you're not allowed to have certain thoughts. You're not allowed to say that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that President Trump is right, that their lockdowns will end, that people will get back to, I don't know, forming crowds and going to the movies, perhaps, or starting a riot. Of course, that's the obvious implication there. But we had people saying, like, you can't talk about hydroxychloroquine. The president is endangering people. And it's this drug that's been around for decades and decades. It's been tested. And never does the government say, go out and try it without the preface of talk to your doctor. If you cut things out of context, it's like, this is a pet peeve of mine as well. When people expect you to say the same obvious thing every time you say a statement. Have you ever had that? Leave me a comment below if you've ever had this situation where, you're just talking generally, and then people expect you to include like the asterisk every single time you say something that you say every other day. I'm like, that's a waste of fucking time, people. That's a whole lot of control. In fact, that's the next line here. And I choose freedom. Okay? I make these videos. I do what I do. I choose freedom. I'm not corporately controlled. I don't ask for money. I do have a sponsor, but I don't monetize the channel. I don't do all these things because I want freedom. And I don't necessarily go by a schedule because I want the freedom to do what I like. I don't want my thoughts, my ideas, my impulses to be stopped. These videos are recorded live for that reason. It's the first thing that comes into your head. You get that. You get it. And then it gets cut into segments later. But I choose freedom. I will say the words we're not allowed to say, talk to the people we're not allowed to associate with, go to the stores we're not allowed to shop at, read the websites we're not allowed to read, have the thoughts we're not allowed to have, and so forth. That's a whole lot of control that I've just thrown out the window because we're about individual agency here. And of course we have to obey law and order. We have to, they talk about defund the police, defund the police, defund the police. Yeah, but who's going to keep you safe? Who are you going to call when a criminal comes, the same people saying defund the police, this is a tangential, but the same people saying defund the police want to take away your guns too and say that it's not right for there to be public militias or people that come together and have, gun groups, and vigilantism is bad. There's a lot of nuance that needs to be addressed there. There are people that shouldn't be running around, unlicensed vigilantes. We've seen what happened with Mr. Arbery there, and that was a disaster. But we there's control, and then there's keeping things safe. And I think when people say you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do this, I think that there's an underlying current of moral virtue there. There's moralism there. There's people that are trying to improve the world for everybody else. So I have a lot of empathy. I have a lot of sympathy for that. But in the end, I choose freedom. I default to freedom. I think we only have so long on this earth to enjoy every moment, and letting people tell you what to do, it isn't right. I think to keep society going, we have to have certain standards, certain laws, ethics, and rules. But I think people are starting to get a little bit too busybody, and they think that they might have a void in their life where they're missing control. And so the modern religion of moral panic, or any of these others, outrage culture, gives them some control. They can say, well, wait a second. Here's something that I can be a part of. Here's a group, here's a tribe that I can be part of. We're all going to just tell this person that they can't be here, or this thing that it's no good for society. And I respect the agency. I just don't necessarily agree with this what's the word? Reductionist philosophy that you want to get rid of more stuff just because you don't like it. I say the more information you have, the better. The more options I have to enjoy things, the better. I don't want to be limited to a narrow window of possibility and opportunity. I choose freedom. So, I rambled a bit there, but I had a lot to say. So as I said earlier, I think it's about time for today's sponsor, LaCroix. It's the sophisticated seltzer. Whether you're a girl or a boy, try LaCroix. LaCroix. Delicious. Okay, so here is another tweet. From September 1st. I'm anti-fascist. Meaning, if you disagree with me, you're a bad person. I'm progressive. Meaning, if you disagree with me, you're against progress. I'm anti-racist too. If you oppose me, you're a racist. I'll keep going until I'm invincible. Then word salad will be served. Bon appetit. So this delves back into word thinking and this idea that, well, maybe if we redefine things and move things around in a postmodern manner, and we start to just take things, literally that should be figurative, and figurative that should be literal, and that everything is a construct, we can just, if we just move things around, we can organize so that no matter what, we're never wrong. Okay? This is this idea. And it's not political. It's not the left or the right it's everybody. It's everybody that believe that words, not everybody as in every single person is doing the same thing, but basically it's it's a broad spectrum of people. They think that changing the words, it does change persuasion a bit. It changes influence. It changes why, it changes people's behavior to change a word. And of course, words have meaning. They have meaning. We need to know exactly how things are defined. You want to take the right drug if you've been prescribed by your doctor. You want to take the right drug. You don't want to pick the wrong one. You don't want to take cyanide when they told you it was Tylenol, right? The word matters. Cyanide versus Tylenol, it matters. And everything in our world, all of our computer programs, everything we have at these lower levels, these deeper levels, of course, everything has to have definition. It has to be exact. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. But with words, with linguistics, we've been seeing, especially in the political context, where hypocrisy is dead. In politics, hypocrisy is dead. I think we can safely say that at this point. I have other videos on that topic, but I figured I'd cover that. So we're seeing Antifa, but it's not just, again, the left. It is every side of the political sphere that's doing this. Linguistic propaganda. So I'm anti-fascist, meaning if you disagree with me, you're a bad person. So what they've done is they take this term fascist and they say, well, if you support the police, and call this a straw man if you want, but this is essentially the way it appears to be. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and derision, if applicable. But they say that, the cops are fascists. The police officers, law enforcement, ICE officers, this is the United States, ICE officers are fascists. And you, Republicans, are fascists. If you support the military and law and order, you're a fascist. There's a lot of this rhetoric out there. So they say, I'm anti-fascist. So by definition, if you disagree with me on this topic, in this context, you're pro-fascist. You have to be. I've taken the position of anti-fascist. Now, for a counter-argument, if we're talking, because anti-fascist is basically a Bernieite left-wing thing. On the right, they have this thing called pro-life. I'm pro-life. I think Gavin McInnes was using this the other day. I'm pro-life. And therefore, what are you if you don't agree with me? Are you anti-life? No. Because just for one data point, one piece, the mother's life also matters, and sometimes birth can have complications that can endanger the mother's life. So clearly it's not we have this world of politics, this world of rhetoric, especially on Twitter, that is full of false binaries, false dichotomies, just a lot of false, this or this, 1 or 0 statements. And the world, in many ways, our world, if you believe in the philosophy of dualism, I have a little bit of that in my philosophy, but, the world isn't all just binaries. There's a lot of binaries. There's a lot of positive or negative, neutral being a goal for many people, this sort of perfect balance, of course. There's a lot of binaries, there's continuums and spectrums, whatever you want, vectors, whatever you want. And there's plenty of places we can have dualism and again, seek subject matter experts. I'm not a dualist philosopher or anything like that, so definitely check that out. But, just because somebody labels themselves something pro-life, anti-fascist, it doesn't mean that disagreeing with them means you really disagree with them. That's the problem. That's a problem with Black Lives Matter. Because Black Lives Matter, and that's a message that we need to say, I guess, because I believe, I heard from Hotep Jesus, definitely check out Hotep Jesus on YouTube and Twitter. He's a radio host and a commentator. But he was saying that, young black people especially, they've convinced themselves that their lives don't matter. And therefore, when you say Black Lives Matter, it's actually a beautiful, positive thing for them. But the problem is that the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just this idea of Black Lives Matter. Like the Me Too movement, it's political. It's a political apparatus. It's not purely to help black lives. It's also to basically bully people into, you either believe in this one, Democrat-backed group, or you're a racist, or you're somebody that, you don't think Black Lives Matter. Now, of course, there's a lot of nuance that is missing here that you need to really, dig down deeper, drill down and find it. Where all lives matter, like, it seems like a slap in the face to say all lives matter, because clearly all lives should matter. But it's the black lives that we're seeing through the media and in front of our faces, frankly, that, in some cases it appears that there's a lot of unfairness. Again, I'm not going to actually deep dive into that topic in this video, but the idea that if you don't believe in BLM, like if you don't push that messaging, you don't believe in black lives, and they use that against the other political team, that is an abomination. That is unfair, It's like you don't have to subscribe to this Republican or Democrat-backed thing. You don't have to like Donald Trump to keep America great, right? And if you think that America wasn't great before, or it isn't great, you don't have to be a Trump supporter to make America great again. You can do it with any ideology you want, as long as it works within the U.S. Constitution and doesn't undermine our values as a nation, and enough people are happy with it. It's not, a sunk cost. It's not something where we're going up a river without a paddle, down a river without a paddle. There's so many sides to it. But saying that, if you don't make your profile pic black, if you don't not post all day, you're not helping. You're not helping the movement. And frankly, I see the virtue in it, but I think that it can be used as a bludgeon for people that don't disagree. That do disagree. Actually, that don't disagree. The idea isn't that, people that don't push the BLM messaging believe that Black Lives Matter, but they're seeing other aspects too that happen to potentially conflict with the humanistic message. Like, for example, the idea that people are fighting in the streets over it. Why are you fighting Black Lives Matter? I thought you were social justice warriors. Or if you believe in modern religion, social justice disciples, Antifa. Why are you fighting Black Lives Matter in the streets? It doesn't make any sense. So they go on with I'm progressive, meaning if you disagree with me, you're against progress. That's another bit of that linguistic thing. There are conservative progressives and progressive conservatives, and there's all these different, we all have our labels for defining our ideology. But with progressive, it's like, conservatives don't have any progress. They don't do progress. And that's what I believe to be, it's actually hilarious, because you see it on every political side. You see it on the right and the left. You see it everywhere. This idea where people kind of go for the low-hanging fruit. There's this thing called red meat, of course. We all know about red meat. But I've seen people that have base political opinions tend to actually go after their own level of people. If they believe that only Democrats can do well, only Democrats are moral, and only they tell the truth, this really, really basic, if only Republicans, only Trump tells the truth, only Trump knows what he's doing. Obviously not the truth. Everybody, in politics, there's different levels of understanding. But these are the people that go after the low-hanging fruit. Like, they'll go after some old retired grandma that barely knows how to tweet. They'll go after a guy, a redneck in a MAGA hat. They won't go after the intellectuals, if you understand what I'm saying. They won't go after the people that can actually make an argument. They'll go after the people that fit the stereotypes that the media and others have portrayed for so long about this ideology or group of people. They won't say, well, there's a lot of businessmen and women. There's a lot of trans people and LGBTQAI plus people here. There's a lot of people of different races. There's a lot of people of different backgrounds and origins and so forth. They're all what the news told you they were. They're what the news told you they were. They're what the movies made them appear to be. So, I'm anti-racist, we're all anti-racist. Unless we're overtly racist, we're anti-racist, okay? And just because you're not pro-life, just because you're pro-choice, doesn't mean you don't want to preserve life. It doesn't mean that you don't have an emotional connection when you see a baby that has been, aborted. I don't want to get too graphic in the video, but, if you oppose me, it's just an ignorant perspective. And the goal of it is, or one of the potential goals of it is, keeping going until they're invincible. They're linguistically invincible. So, at that point, word salad is served up. Because while words have meaning, and we need to make sure we're keeping track of what everything means, and you have to, if you have an ideology, say for like minarchism, you have to have a definition. Everything has to make sense. But there are people that seem to think that if they say enough words, they can get into a position that they're unassailable and serve word salad, and then say, bon appetit. And I find it to be hilarious, basically. Because they're just words. It's word thinking. Change the word. It's like, again, and we talked about mind over matter before, but this is one of those cases where it doesn't really work out very well. So, onward to the next tweet. Okay. So here is a tweet called Climate Change Solutions. I have a number of videos out about climate change. In some contexts, I do refer to it as the modern religion of global warming, but there are effects to the changing of the climate. Climate does change. Check out my video, the Anthropogenic Global Warming Glossary #1. The debate glossary #1 on BitChute and YouTube, where I talk a little bit more about how I feel about climate change as a topic of rhetoric and discussion, especially politically, but in terms of science as well. So I'll talk about climate change solutions. I give good and bad here. This was a popular tweet. By my lofty standards. We'll start with the good. Good. Plant trees. Climate change solution. Plant trees. Develop Generation 3 and 4 nuclear power. Make solar energy viable. Work on carbon capture. Improve fossil fuel efficiency. So these are all the good things we could do. Going into the next thing are the bad climate change solutions, the ones we shouldn't be doing. Just a moment here. So, got a little sidetracked by the phone there. Bad climate change solutions. Eat bugs instead of steak. Don't have children. Enact authoritarianism. Apply a carbon tax. And halt the world economy. So let's start with the good and talk just a little bit about each of these little items here. Plant trees. So, of course, trees eat carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the devil of the modern religion known as global warming. CO2, they say that it's causing all these problems with rising of water and melting of the ice caps. They're all related. Now, there are certain environments in the world that are very hot, and if they get more hot, people will die. And there's places that are very cold, and of course, everything follows. If they get colder, it'll probably cause problems as well. So there's places where we have to be aware of our environment. I consider myself an environmentalist, so we want to be aware of our impact on the environment. So I'm not saying that climate change isn't real. I'm not saying that global warming necessarily isn't the truth. I do have an agnosticism to the modern religion because, frankly, we've heard stories of global warming, global cooling back in the 1970s, and over the years, weather has been used. The sky is falling, things are getting warmer, things are getting colder. It's been used to generate fear since the beginning of civilization. People worship the sun. And now, people would pray for rain. They do rain dances. They'd pray for rain so their crops would grow. We have a lot of attachment to, our mood changes when we see the rain outside. So CO2, of course, is the devil. You got to lower your carbon. Breathe a little less. Oh, shit. I let some go. Check out my video on YouTube, Carbon Guilt, for more about that. But we want to plant trees. If we plant a couple billion trees, maybe even 1 trillion trees over time, it'll eat up more of that carbon dioxide and it will produce oxygen for us all to breathe. And we will then, of course, breathe it in and emit carbon dioxide. The trees eat that. If I'm getting any of this wrong, let me know in the comments section below. But planting trees is a good climate change solution. Developing Generation 3 and 4 nuclear power. So nuclear is the power source of the future. My friend Mark Schneider talks about this quite often. He's a big advocate and expert on Generation 3 and 4 nuclear. And what makes these different, and when people think about nuclear, they think a lot about Chernobyl, and they think about other things that are a bit more negative in terms of, there's radiation effects. But now we've reached, that was many years ago, those older reactors. We also think of things like the atom bomb and all this stuff, nuclear bombs and all these things that are highly destructive. But Generation 3 and notably Generation 4 have a couple of things going for them that I think should help people get over their fears. And one of them is that Generation 4 can't melt down. It has protections against melting down, which is one of the biggest fears about nuclear in general. But not only that, it eats nuclear waste for fuel. Generation 4 nuclear designs eat nuclear waste for fuel with a high yield, about 80 to 90%. So not only are they cleaner, they're more environmentally friendly, they don't emit the carbon that, burning oil and gas and things do. They also, of course, use their own waste for fuel. So I think we should be developing more and more nuclear energy. I think it could be the solution to our long-term problems, and every town can have its own reactors. So the technological advances of nuclear energy have been so dramatic over the past 30, 40, 50 years that people that were scared of it for reasons that might have to do with, Russia, Cold War, Might have to do with propaganda that, you know, nuclear is just something we don't want for some political reason from the 70s and 60s. Look it up. We don't have to worry about that anymore because we have come so far. We have these newer designs, and many of them are already in action. I think France is about 85 to 90% nuclear. And while I don't have the fear of the carbon from fossil fuels and natural gas and such, I do think that nuclear is going to be future proof and forward thinking. So definitely develop those. Third good climate change solution is called make solar energy viable. So right now, solar energy and wind-based energy essentially are, how do I put this? If you're using solar or wind as a product, you're leaning pretty heavily on fossil fuels to fill in where these two can't provide. They fall back. The backup plan is the fossil fuels. So really, while they might come off as potentially, you know, might seem like, oh, well, solar, wind, they're cleaner. The fact that they rely on dirtier energy to maintain their stability, to maintain their power output, is pretty important. So we have to figure out a way to make solar energy viable, to make it, you know, more affordable to install, to make it more passive, like have a solar here, solar there. Relying on solar alone isn't going to happen. We're going to be using natural gas, nuclear, oil, all this stuff. We're going to be using fossil fuel for this for a long time. And coal too. I mean, coal is another one that's being processed more and more. So we have to work to make solar energy more viable and less reliant on fossil fuel to back it up. Working on carbon capture. So some of these nuclear power plants have this thing that they could have nearby called carbon capture. You can actually attach it to a nuclear plant. There's designs for that out there. But the general idea of carbon capture is actually literally sucking the carbon dioxide out of the air using a complicated process and machine and converting it into fuel, converting it to other things. So you're actually, if you think there's too much CO2 in the air, you have carbon capture, you can actually remove the carbon from the air and find another application for it. Carbon dioxide, CO2. And finally, under good is improve fossil fuel efficiency. So basically, fossil fuels aren't going away. We just had all this stuff happen with Russia and Saudi Arabia and the United States. Talking about, many years ago we talked about peak oil, but now we're looking and gas is cheaper than ever, and there's a lot of stuff happening. And we're not seeing much of an impact on the climate. The climate's just going along fine for the most part. They'll cherry pick for the modern religion of global warming, but ultimately it's not going to change anything because we don't all have electric cars. Electric cars require charging that takes energy from other sources. There's not enough lithium in the world for everyone to have it. So we're going to have to deal with, you know, managing. If you think that CO2 is declining the world's health, you know, if you're declining the health of the earth itself, you're going to be managing the decline for the rest of your life. That's basically what it's going to be, because fossil fuels aren't going away. I'm not giving up my gas guzzler. Nobody is, you know, we're trying to do hybrid, but basically so many houses, homes in America, buildings, all these things are natural gas, fossil fuel, and oil. And we have to work within that, not try to erase it. That's my opinion. Of course, some scientists may disagree. They might say, well, we're almost to the tipping point. We're almost to the tipping point. And I say, well, look, you can't just, you know, some countries haven't even gotten to where we are yet with gas and oil. You can't just say, well, you know, it's a first world privilege thing to do, to say, let's get rid of this, because over in India, they just got electricity in certain areas. China, these 1.4, 1.5 billion people, they're struggling with it. There's third world countries all over the world, all over the place, that don't have the resources or technology we have, and they're relying more and more on coal and oil. they don't have the privilege of setting up, you know, a billion windmills or something like that. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the money. We don't have the resources. So finally, we're going to go into the bad. We're going to go into the bad climate change solutions. And these are pretty bad. Like, this is like hilariously bad. First one is eat bugs instead of steak. For a climate change solution, you want to eat bugs instead of steak? No. I know we talked earlier in the video about food thoughts and that, hey, you know, maybe you can imagine you're eating something better and your brain will do some of the work, and you don't have to eat high quality food. You can eat low quality and pretend it's high quality, and eventually you'll convince yourself of it, so your standards will lower, and it'll be in your best interest for that to happen. Whatever I said earlier in the video. But bugs? Bugs? Instead of steak? No. Now, I know that that's kind of red meat. That's an easy, again, that's finding not the most intellectual person or argument to go after, but going after one of the more ridiculous extremes. It's very red meat. It may even be a steak. But the people were out there saying that we should start learning how to eat bugs, process bugs into food, and use them for everything, instead of having the luxury of cows and meat, red meat and steak and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you're not going to tell me I can't eat steak. To save the environment, to save the trees, save the environment, save the ozone layer. That's what I heard 30 years ago. Ozone layer is fine, folks. Ozone layer is fine. But they were saying that. Don't have children. AOC, God bless her. She's like, maybe you shouldn't have children. Don't bring them into this world, this flaming ball of shit that's flying through the galaxy. Because the more children you have, the more they're going to have to deal with climate change, the evils that are coming in 10 years or 30 years, or maybe we said they were coming 40 years ago, but they never came. Maybe they're coming in 100 years. Let's go with 2080 or 2100. How about that? By then, you're going to know climate change is real. Climate change is a real problem. Just have to wait. Patience is a virtue. You just have to wait till 2080. And meanwhile, don't have children. Lower the birth rates of the United States. Or wherever you'd like, whatever multicultural environment you want to lower the birth rates in, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it. Also, borders are bad. And ICE officers are bad. You see where I'm going with this? Maybe. So the next thing is enact authoritarianism. So basically try to take control over everything to save the environment. Recently there were people that had apparently taken over Maine fishing up in Maine, because it wasn't environmental, and so they gave the American fishermen and fisherwomen, the men and women of the fishing industry, they gave them a disadvantage against Canada and many other countries and states by saying that, hey, you can't fish here. And so they could do more of that. They could say, you can't burn fires here because carbon comes out of the flame. You can't drive your car. You can't have children. You can't eat steak. I already covered it. It's all in that same authoritarian frame, basically. You can't do this. You can't do that. Why? The invisible man in the sky told me. His name's climate change. The man's name is climate change. Another friend of his is called Entropy. Entropy. And he's also a son of a bitch. But they'll enact authoritarianism. They'll tell you all the stuff you shouldn't do, you can't do, because of climate. And they'll even apply a carbon tax. Everybody has to pay a carbon tax. Every time you do something that's carbon related, You pay a tax. It's just another tax for basically living a normal American life, a normal, you drive a car that isn't all electric. There's a tax on you for that. Anything you're doing to contribute to this thing that we can't really measure in any meaningful way. Like, we have all our models and things, we have all our little measurements of different parts of it, but ultimately nobody has cracked the code of weather. It's just never been done. That's why the experts disagree on some of the finer points. Even the smartest people in the world disagree with some of this stuff that other people are saying. And so carbon tax is just another way to get you to pay higher taxes, and then give an excuse, well, climate. So that's not a great climate change solution for me. And of course, the final one, and a big one, is a bad solution for climate change would be to halt the world economy. Because frankly, if you say, we're not going to use fossil fuels anymore, we're not going to use the energy we've been using that much of the world uses, we're going to effectively close off production in other countries. If they're being told in India or any of these other places, in the Middle East or in anywhere in Africa, Europe, Asia, anywhere in the world, they're told you can't. I know you're a growing country, you're a growing economy, you're trying to get bigger and better, but we got to tell you can't use natural gas, coal, or oil anymore. That's going to halt the world economy. That's going to stop countries that had a chance, that were third world, that were trying their best, that were trying to play with the big boys, to come up, and it was working. But we can't go ahead and stop their power source. That there's no better option. We have nuclear. We're trying to develop it, but it's going to be decades before nuclear is standard across the world, if ever. And we're fighting. There's a war. There's like a civil war going on in Africa. There's Ebola. There's all these things that are holding these people back. And you're going to add another factor in there that for climate change, we're going to make it harder for you to get energy because ozone layer and CO2 is up and water levels, the tide gauges in some places haven't changed in 30 years. Okay? The tide gauges haven't changed in some places for 30 years. They're not trending. Al Gore said that, hey, the guy that we all, in Inconvenient Truth, one of the biggest pieces on climate change in the past 20 years, Manhattan's going to be underwater by 2014. And then Barack Obama goes ahead and buys a $15 million mansion on, Martha's Vineyard? So I only bring politics into it because it's a political question at this point. Like, we have the science on one end. You can't mix and match. There is scientific fact about the way that physics works, chemistry works, and what geologists do, and all this stuff, like the climate scientists, which is not really necessarily an exact, occupation. It's more of like a popular term for people that happen to have different disciplines or degrees and expertise in different areas in climate. But I digress. We have people that are doing the scientific method, finding the truth about our reality. But then you have the other side. Politics. You have persuasion. You have manipulation, propaganda. You have people that allow our emotions. We all allow our emotions to drive our decision making. We have our in-group preference, our bias. But in politics, they've turned it into this question of, well, if you're pro-science, again, we're going back to the anti-pro tweet. If you're pro-science, you believe in these guys. The thing is, though, again, just like with Black Lives Matter, as well-intentioned or as nuanced as the intention may be with Black Lives Matter, it's not that the people that don't go along with climate change as a political topic don't believe the scientists. They believe in science, okay? But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're asking people, if you're trying to enact authoritarianism and do it politically, using rhetoric, using linguistic propaganda, using all these different things, using leverage on voters to say, well, if you don't vote for me, the other side, they don't give a shit. And I'm not talking about our scientists, but the other political side, they don't give a shit. That's their argument. You're either here. And so people, again, it's all our personal responsibility or agency that we need to use and exercise to make sure that we are making informed decisions. We shouldn't be going just by political team because, we need to be able to rationalize why we're doing things in a way that's can be observed and is truthful. We all obviously we rationalize every decision. After we make a decision on our ego or our impulses, our emotions, we're compelled. And then we turn around and we say, well, we did this because I'm reframing. There it is. So there's all these different angles to it. But basically, like when you politicize it, it really just changes the discussion. And it's going to inspire people to go with this idea. There are some politicians out there that are more globalist than nationalist. Some of them truly want to, lower our standing in the world. I believe that. I've seen that. But I think we've reached a new era with technology and all the things that have, all the ground up moments in science that has happened and been happening over the past 50 to 100 years and more since the start of the Industrial Revolution. I think the internet has allowed us to reach this place where we're not post-scarcity. We have to keep working hard to generate resources and create abundance, but I don't think we're at a place where the United States is too powerful or any country is too powerful, except maybe China, because of the number of people that are there and the amount of resources they have. But I don't think we need to be trying to be more fair except for diplomatic purposes. Like, I don't feel any guilt from being in the United States. I think there's a lot of messaging from people that we should feel guilty for being American. I don't think so. So I don't think that we should, again, as Americans, I think we should have our Humvees. We should have our Hummers. That's right. Get a Hummer. But we should have that and not worry about harming our own economy or hurting third world countries that are trying to build theirs with fossil fuels. So we should improve the fossil fuel efficiency, make it cleaner, make it better, make it allow it to be used more often, get more bang for your buck, as it were. But I don't think we should get rid of it. Okay. 2 more tweets for you today. We'll do a relatively quick one and then a longer one. So, we've had a lot of questions lately about police brutality and the role of police in our society due to what happened to George Floyd and what's going on with the riots that are kind of slowing a bit, what's happened with the protests, both peaceful and non-peaceful. But I'm not going to take a side per se, but I'd like to at least describe, since so many people are saying defund the police and the police are bad, I want to share a little bit. And it's a named tweet. It's called Good Cop. Good Cop. Having interacted with law enforcement a number of times, including conditions too interesting for Twitter, I have compiled evidence on the behavior of police officers. Dedicated to their work, tough, and patient, working hard to keep irrational situations rational. Good cop. So let's walk through this named tweet. Having interacted with law enforcement a number of times, including conditions too interesting for Twitter, I have compiled evidence on the behavior of police officers. So I have been taken in by the police a few times over my years. Once when I was a bit younger, it was a case of mistaken identity. The officers had taken me, this is right after the Patriot Act was signed and went into law after 9/11. It was in the first half of the aughts. I think they were called the aughts. It was like 2003 or 2004. And they had taken me aside because they thought that I was somebody else. And they asked me questions. And they made me late for my train, and my train only came every 3 hours, so I was stuck out of my town. I was stuck where I worked at the time. So I have some, empathy. I have some experience and empathy with people that have interacted with the police. That was the first time I actually was taken to the car. I'll tell you a little bit about it because it's too interesting for Twitter, but this is a tweet video. So they took me to the car and interrogated me, asked me questions, and I was extremely, extremely compliant and cooperative. I literally stood there as a police officer ran up to me and put his hand in my coat pocket and just rifled through. I'm like, I almost didn't know what was going on. I'm like, oh, he has a badge and there's other police officers around. And I didn't know what was going on. I was so young. I was in my early 20s. Or late teens even. I don't even remember. So long ago. But I was okay with it. I was actually okay because I knew that I had been propagandized to that the Patriot Act was keeping us safe. In some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. Of course, our privacy, our Fourth Amendment rights are being destroyed under it. There's other things that have gone. I think President Obama might have... We never got rid of Guantanamo Bay. Not that that's necessarily related to this topic. Habeas corpus, we got rid of that. I'm not sure if that was in the Patriot Act, but again, these are things that once you... I don't want to say it's deterministic or that there's a slippery slope, but once you install one set of laws... then you have the NSA come in, what happened with Edward Snowden, what he revealed. It's all just, it does become this situation where if you let it happen, if something's happening that you don't like and you don't have an opportunity to see it, you can't change it, right? You need to know what you're up against to request that it change, but we didn't even know. All we knew was, Patriot Act. And that really just gave them... a get out of jail free card for burning the Constitution. So it wasn't really the best thing. But at the time I was convinced. I actually voted for Bush in 2004, the first time I was able to vote. So I interacted with the law enforcement back then. I went along with it. They let me go. They asked me all the questions and they let me go. Later in life, I'm a little less interested in discussing this one right now, maybe at a later time, but later in life, I did actually get taken in by the police for something that was a slight misunderstanding as well. I wasn't charged or arrested or for anything. But basically, I got to see this sort of... I'm going to use my words carefully in case police officers are watching, but it is kind of a robotic military sort of poise that police officers have. That, when you're operating within the law, when you're trying to enforce a system of ethics, a system of laws that have been decided on in courts, that have been written, that we've all agreed upon for our society to be whole, to have it make sense, to make sure that it's complete. They're trained in a way that isn't necessarily, it's not how you experience the rest of your life. It's a very rigid, very disciplined, and frankly, somewhat dehumanizing way that, you have to be drained of your emotion. You have to learn to think logically. You need to learn to think fast and decisively in moments of absolute peril and danger for not only citizens, but for yourself every day, depending on what kind of police job you're doing. So I have, and I got to see that this sort of basically automatic behavior from police. They're so trained, they're so ready that they're going to go through their procedure. They're going to go through the code, and they're going to make sure that nobody gets hurt, if possible, and nobody gets killed, especially not them. Okay, because if they're not there to protect, if they get killed first, not that they would care because they're dead, but there would be other people getting hurt because the officer isn't there to protect them if they called the police. So there's a number of reasons why I actually have a lot of empathy for police officers. I wouldn't become one, but I see defund the police, get rid of ICE, get rid of the police, get rid of law enforcement. And then 5 seconds later, a burglar comes in, and you're calling the police. Oh, what are you going to do about it? They stole my TV. Oh, my God. I wanted you defunded 5 seconds ago, but now I need your help. I've changed my tune, man. I changed my tune. I say, I love weed, but you need to take a break. Need to get a job. Take a break. So they're dedicated to their work. Police officers are tough. Not every cop, not every police officer, not every person is good at their job. Not everyone is ethical. Some are corrupt. We understand that. We don't have to always include the counterpoint is some cops aren't as good. Yeah, the one that had his fucking knee on George Floyd's neck wasn't my favorite cop. He's a dumbass. If he's not doing it to kill the guy, he's just fucking stupid. Dude's dying on the ground from ODs, COVID, whatever it might be that the media has reported. I don't believe reports for the most part. This guy should have known better. His friends in the law enforcement should have known better. But they're dedicated. They're tough. They're putting themselves in harm's way to keep their communities safe, to keep their country safe, to keep people safe. It's not a clean situation. It's not sophistopop. It's not yacht rock. It is noisy. It is noise rock. It is, hell, it's swans. It's something different. If we're going to frame it as music, it's something totally different. But they're dedicated. They're tough. They're patient because they're working hard to keep irrational situations rational. So they're not we're not dealing with ideal situations here. We're talking about cops that are coming into uncertain, unpredictable situations, oftentimes with people that are armed, sometimes not armed, but still they can provide danger. A lot of times these people are drugged up, so you don't know what they'll do. You don't know if they'll grab a car and run people over. You don't know what they're going to do. Will they grab for your gun and shoot you because they're crazy? Police officers have to deal with this. They can't sit there and go, with hindsight, be a hindsight prophet. Well, he was rushing at me with a sword, and maybe I shouldn't have shot him. But he was running at me with a sword. So it seemed the most prudent thing. I know I'm being charged for manslaughter because he was not really armed, and he had not actually physically attacked me. I mean, I'm coming up with a dumb situation. But, obviously there are cases where the police officer acted poorly. We can't deny that. We see that every day. But I think that at the end of the day, you don't have to be a sociopath to be a cop, and you don't have to be somebody that wants to hurt people to be a cop. It takes a lot of discipline and patience to be a law enforcement or military personnel. And when you say defund the cops, I'm going to just say this. That's privilege. Okay? If you live in a world that's so safe that you want to defund the cops, you're not only privileged, I call that child view. You've got a childlike view, an idealistic, nobody ever gets hurt, people that run around robbing things, hurting people, attacking people, committing crimes should not be charged because that's racism or that's sexism, whatever you want to call it. Because they never mention, it's always a political thing. It doesn't ever feel like it's genuine. It's more like, well, cops, we don't want the cops because our political side doesn't want it. Again, I'm just spitballing here, but I see a lot of these patterns and it can annoy me. I'm not very patient, unlike the cops, when it comes to irrational people on a daily basis. But moving on, one more tweet for you today. Today's sponsor, LaCroix. Sunday's video in which I piss off your friends from September 4th. I wonder if I pissed off anybody's friends. Another piece of positive messaging for nuclear power in Generation 3 and 4 is that they can be used in space. We're doing the new NASA, we had the SpaceX launch, and we have Space Force, which I love. And there's a new show with Steve Carell called Space Force, with humor as written as if it's by the Late Show writers or some other slightly orange man bad writing staff. So check that out. But yeah, no, nuclear in space, nuclear mobile miniature nuclear reactors could be a big part of our space travel. Maybe Elon Musk could get us to Mars with all these nuclear reactors and things and help empower things. I don't know. I am not a scientist. I'm just an amateur social scientist. Abbreviated ASS. And I'll finish up with this tweet. And I'll just say it and not break it down because it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a struggle finding art critics that don't filter their commentary through smug left-wing tropes. I don't need to hear about the patriarchy, imperialism, late-stage capitalism, etc. every time I open up a music review. I thought this when I was more on the left. Give it a rest. So thank you, Pitchfork, for watching the video today. That's the end of our content for today. I really appreciate everyone that made it this far. A bit of a long video today, but it was fun. It was enjoyable. We rambled a bit, but we got it done. So, as I always say, I am on Twitter at RealJeffTidwell. I'm also on Gab, Minds, Parler, Telegram, and Instagram. If you are not watching this video on BitChute, you're watching it on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, like and subscribe. If you didn't, troll me and hit the downvote button. It really helps me with the algorithm. And of course, as I say, everything I said today might be right. Or everything I said today might be wrong. Perhaps some of it's right and some of it's wrong. I think that makes the most sense. So thank you again for watching. Stay dry, stay cool during these hot summer months. We're coming into June and it is getting pretty scorching out there. So again, thank you, and I hope you have a great day.